Good morning. How are you?
Doing all right.
All
Ready to
right.
go?
Ready to go. Okay. So what we're you chose the topic, so you want to get us rolling?
I will. So last time we were talking about transition to college, helping families, students think about what's new and different academically, intellectually. Something I spend a lot of time thinking about. It's timely in the calendar, so to speak. And then I was thinking about a part two, thinking of your work, Matt. Certainly you've done work on the academic side, but also in terms of student life and students' living situations. And I remember many conversations and a theme that emerged around students and their living situation and other things where there were conflict avoidance as a pattern, as a way of kind of dealing with challenges and difficulties you saw as a root cause for maybe the rise of them or the source of them, and also the inability or the difficulty in resolving some of these naturally understandable, quite predictable difficulties as students transition into the university. I thought that might be a useful topic. And then I'll reveal, I think conflict avoidance is a pattern that I have, and so it's self-serving to hear about it as well, to be frank.
No, you're absolutely right. When I was serving as a director of student life in the residential colleges at Princeton University, obviously you're going to have rooming situations, rooming conflicts, and a lot of those were not always, but a good number of them were perhaps not caused, but at least exacerbated by conflict avoidance and the inability or just the lack of desire to just engage and work through issues. A lot of students would just rather yield, just kind of whatever, just avoid the problem. And that was perhaps a good short-term strategy, but then come spring semester, inevitably there was, there's this volcano that was ready to explode, and it would, because you get frustrated, and so you often get these students who just couldn't take it anymore. They avoided, kind of yielded to whatever their perhaps more pushy roommate wanted, and then come spring there would be a big blowout. So so that is definitely an issue, that there's conflict avoidance, and I think that manifests itself in different ways. Like that's perhaps the most acute.
Yeah.
But there's other ways that are, I think, perhaps that conflict avoidance manifests itself, or just the wanting to avoid awkward situations. So that's why I think students are perhaps reluctant to go to office hours. They're reluctant to share or talk in precepts. And even in my last stop at the university working in career services, you see students who are very reluctant to reach out to alums and asking for advice and whatnot. And again, it's just this awkwardness. And so they'd rather just avoid it at all costs.
Yeah. So, I think from my point of view, thinking about engagement's a big word, and the distinct features of college. Students as academic adults, as young adults, there's a shift in expectations and responsibilities to be proactive, take initiative, to seek out engagement, to take that step. So, these things are offered. A precept, Princeton's word for a discussion section, a recitation session in the rest of the world. I don't know why we call it precept, but or office hours. These things that really can be powerful experiences for students. They can really transform one's experience in a class. They're what make being at a place at a university great. It's direct contact with a leading thinker in the field. The alumni network, which draws a lot of students, but all these things, for the most part, presume a kind of active engagement on the part of students. And so I think it's really crucial, right? So, but if you're avoiding that out of sense of awkwardness or to avoid conflict, but in fact, you're not getting the kind of education that you could. I think it's really core that you're making that connection. it's manifest in multiple ways. One way is in the rooming situation, but not only.
Right. Yeah, and what's tragic is that it's working through those and learning from them, and perhaps making mistakes, but the willingness to engage, as you talk about, that's so vital for their time in college in terms to really leverage and maximize the time, but also post college and whatever career they're going to have. It's going to be fraught with conflicts and challenging situations. So can you have the confidence in yourself to engage? And I guess that's the key, is how do you start to build up the self-esteem, the self-worth, the confidence to go where you wouldn't go before. So,
So how do you?
Yeah. Yeah, you have the answers. Yeah.
Well, I think I might add just one piece, and there's some skills too. Yeah, so that's my angle as a kind of coach. Is there's a skill that can give you a sense of confidence, like if you know how to do it. But I think it's not the only competency or requisite to be able to do this. I don't know. I mean, I think you've talked a little bit, I think, about your own development of this, and even a kind of embracing of, in our previous conversations, not necessarily on Vogue Academy, but of a shift in perspective and embracing that process of being assertive or proactive, and seeing the value of finding that point of conflict as ultimately on the other side, so to speak, beneficial in a variety of ways. I think mutually beneficial too, right?
Yeah, I think I think if I were speaking to some students right now, I would be like, first and foremost, realize that grades got you pretty far, but they're only going to get you so far.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it'd be easy for students to say, well, I only have so much energy to invest. So I'd rather invest in studying, grinding through whatever problem set, versus the emotional toll or depletion that, talking with your roommate, doing, trying new things, whatever. Those, those, like you're making investments. And I think a lot of students say, oh, I just rather, if I just focus on grades, everything's going to be great. And because that kind of worked, got them into whatever university. But I think, as we know, that, and it might be we do get good grades, but it's not going to translate into a really rich college experience and really thriving in college and post-college, whatever you're doing. So I think that's the first thing, is just to say, don't rationalize conflict avoidance by telling yourself, oh, I'm just making wise investments in study instead. That's
so kind of diminishing its importance, so I don't have to deal with it. And this other thing is so important, it's all consuming. I don't have time for that.
Right. I think that's the first thing I would say, because that's a way to kind of mask, or I hate to use the word cop out, but it kind of is, it's like
it's a rationalization.
I think it's the best way. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So I think go ahead.
If you want a term, a technical term in motivate, it's called motivated cognition, right? So your cognition is motivated to come to a conclusion that you want, in this case, which is avoidance. You have the impulse to avoid. Then we use our human cognitive apparatus to give ourselves reasons for that are acceptable to us. That's very similar. That's what's going on in procrastination. It's acceptable disengagement. We have to make it acceptable. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, so I think that might be good, because in the end, you have to have the motivation to start living in these awkward situations and putting yourself in situations where you're not going to feel safe per se, be it the roommate conflict or whatever else. So I think that's that's the first thing, is just saying, what do you really, really, really want? If you want to be a professor, you want to go off in the business world or nonprofit world and whatever, just keeping, like, what is it going to really take to be as impactful as you want? It's not going to be by just focusing on grades. You may think that's the case, but that's not really the case. And so I think there has to be a realization of that, like, what are your goals and what do you really want? But that's hard. I think it's hard because it's so easy to be so focused on grades, because that's all you've done, and your life's been centered around that. And so to kind of take a shift and say, well, yeah, I want to focus on grades and learning, but also there's this, work on my emotional intelligence and the skills that are manifested through that. That's kind of a tough sell, I think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, it's so key for students to learn that. And I think one thing I would tell, just an example of that, part of my job as a director of student life was to supervise what we call the RCAs, often they're called RAs, elsewhere we call them RCAs, residential college advisors. So upper class men who were, would live in areas or zones in the dorm and were in charge of first year and second year students. And it was interesting when we go through training, we do a lot of role play, and there were times when they were thrust into awkward situations, like breaking up a party or whatever, and it was very easy for them to try to save face with the students by saying something like, oh, we need to break this party so you don't get in trouble with public safety. So they kind of, throw public safety, the campus police, under the bus as the reason why they have to break up this party. And so I would stop and say, well, why did you feel the need to do that? And that they would see, yeah, that was kind of a cop out, because they were, instead of just saying, hey, we need to disband this party and just taking whatever vitriol or whatever that comes their way, instead of just taking that and kind of risking their peer perception because of that, they would try to kind of say, hey, I'm on your side, by the fact that public safety, the mean old public safety is coming. If that makes sense. So we would get down to the motivational level and help them realize that, hey, this is what you're doing. And they were, in a way, they were kind of stunned because they didn't think that initially,
Right.
because they were just, the action is I'm breaking up the party. That's good. The way I do it matters, but if I'm throwing public safety on the bus, that's not a big deal. But then when you say, well, what motivationally, what's going on there, they're a bit like, well, okay, that's not the self that I really want to be. That makes sense. So that was a good realization on their part, and a way they would grow. And that was, and it was neat, was they would appreciate that. I mean, I wasn't judgmental. I would just say, hey, let's, in a way, I would ask questions so they could discover what their true motivations were. And once they realized that, then you could see them saying, that's not the self kind of person I want to be. And they would grow through that experience.
So use some key words there from our angle: this preservation of self, face, the cultivating or creating a perception of oneself by others as the root motivations that were not, the students or the RCAs were not fully aware of, but were crucial. And then giving them a chance to reflect on that or identify that and say, so they came to this realization, is when you said that's not the person I want to be. Can you say a bit more about that? Like, what did they want to be? I mean, because it seems like it'd be easy to say, well, they will get in trouble by public safety, and someone could call, and that's kind of what the students care about, is not getting in trouble. So what's wrong with that exactly? And how is that not being their best selves?
Yeah, no, I think what they would realize is that they were managing or manipulating the situation, and because they felt awkward, they felt a bit exposed, if that makes sense. And their self-identity was on the line, because it was built on, hey, these they call them Z's, these first year students really love me and they think I'm amazing. I'm their guide through their first year, and you're jeopardizing that a little bit because you're having to come in and kind of be the bad person.
Enforce the rule.
Yeah. So it's easy, instead of just accepting that and just being okay with that, you're casting that perception, or that what you think the people are going to perceive, onto public safety. So you're kind of, again, throwing them under the bus. And is that really, you're part, some of the people in public safety, is that really what you want to do? Like, and would you do that some other situation with friends, or perhaps with folks in your study group, or eventually with colleagues at work? So I think they could see the ramifications of, oh, is this the type of way I want to deal with an awkward situation where I'm feeling a sense of my self-identity being jeopardized. So, and I think they were, and again, it was not a huge issue. It wasn't like the company somehow lost $5 million and you're, who's to blame? And you're like, well, it's the other department, not me. I mean, this is pretty low stakes. And so in a way, it's a great incubator for working, or, kind of having a mirror to yourself and seeing not only your actions and thoughts, but your motivations. And then saying, is this really what the person want to be? And, and again, hopefully in my role, I wasn't a judge. I was more of a coach, trainer, to help them see this dynamic, and then help them to figure out what do they really want for themselves. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And seeing these, and you as their supervisor, coaching and working with them, not only for the immediate situation, but for the future, and framing that in terms of what are the issues of a early 20 something, which is, who am I and how am I going to be? And I think there's ways that and universities do address that, but I think not nearly as much as students at some level want and thirst for. This makes me think of when I think about what students want out of college, and I think what they need, I sometimes talk about the kind of 3 Ps. They want preparation, hopefully, for their life and career. They want to be positioned, so they want accolades and rewards and degrees, and that positions them in networks, in the network, for instance. So they pick an institution with reputation and prestige to do that. But I think a third thing that often is, and I think you're getting at, that sacrifice to those first 2 is practice. Like, I want them to practice how they want to be in the world. So I think there's an easy thought, well, I'll just live this way now, but when I graduate, then I'll live the way that I want to live, and I'll have more time, and it'll be easier. And Princeton's hard, and Berkeley was hard, but I'm not sure it gets any easier. And in fact, I'm not convinced. I'm not persuaded at all. I think it gets harder. And so this is his example. He said, well, it's low stakes. This is actually an opportunity to pause with some guidance from me as your supervisor, because I have student staff too, that you're probably not going to get at the next level, and ask these questions of yourself and say, okay, what knowledge or skills or approach or ways of thinking do I need to cultivate and develop to be able to do that? And that's what the practice is your training, essentially. But I hear a few key pieces in the process. One is kind of noting that, what's really motivating me, and being sensitive to, am I avoiding, am I providing a rationale? To kind of accepting your role and responsibility, in this case, as someone who advises and enforces with students. There's one part you really like, there's a part you don't like so much, but it is part of your job, and you signed up for that, and that's actually, the students need it. So that kind of acceptance. And then when making a hard choice, to put it in relation to not only the immediate circumstances, but as you said, what you really want, your own development, your own growth, putting it in dialogue with future ambitions, as a source of energy, right? Motivation to do that hard thing, to develop a new capability, to be awkward or uncomfortable, right? We need reasons for that. We need energy for that. So I kind of see that as a pattern. Is there anything missing, or is that like capturing what you're trying to cultivate with your?
Yeah, I think I would emphasize, in a way that the way we, the way schools are set up and a lot of parents, whatever, the odds are kind of against you. Like I think about your work, Nick, because you're wanting the same thing. You're wanting students to practice, to try new ways of studying, or and yet I think I would be resistant as a student, because I'm like, well, I don't have time to do that. I have to get these good grades. Because I need. So there's this formula, unwritten formula, that you got to grind. You got to do
Do
study
more.
the way you study, because it's worked before, and you got to get these good grades, because that translates into the internship, and the internship into job offers and all this kind of stuff. And so these well-worn tracks don't necessarily promote the idea of oh no, let's practice. Because as soon as I practice, then I'm putting something at risk.
I think
Right?
exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, I think one way I've been, so as we're approaching orientation sessions, and things at the university as the semester starts, one simple little formula I've used to try to get students to understand this is like, okay, yes, college is more. It's harder. There's more material. It goes faster. There's a quantitative difference increase, but that can conceal the qualitative differences. And that's really important for how you respond, because if it's more, then the demands on me academically are more than what would be a natural response. Grind, do more studying. But if it's different, then what's the appropriate response? Change, adapt. Doing more actually prevents me from adapting and changing, because I don't have time to change. I don't have time to reflect. I don't have time to experiment, because I'm doing more, but that won't resolve the issue. At least, but you'll have to do some of that. I think it is harder. Certainly Princeton is, compared to almost any high school, but and Berkeley the same. But it's not only that. And I think you're exactly right. And then there's a multitude of reasons not to change or try something new that have to do with risk, and a purely rational sense that, well, it got me here, right? As you said, right. Good grades and the single-minded focus. And I couldn't, I think a lot of times our admissions systems reward not only excellence, but the absence of mistakes. And these are two very different things. And they have very different motivations and different consequences. So, I've tried to really drill down and find ways to communicate to students entering this new environment. You're not wrong to say you're going to have to work harder. I certainly did when I went to college, but I also had moments where I learned to change. So I'll just share one, which I sometimes use. I hadn't thought of it in a long time, but I remember as undergrad, I was studying biopsychology, which meant I actually the same classes as pre-med students. And so there was a very intense environment. Students were actually pretty competitive, and I was doing what they're doing. And I had met a couple of people, and they made flashcards, and I'd never done that in high school. I'm like, okay, I'll make a flashcard. And I was studying flashcards, and I had stacks of flashcards, like literally this huge. And I remember I had this moment of studying the flashcards. And I was eating like a chocolate bar or something. It was a thumb smudge on one of the flashcards. I've ever told you this story. And I'm like, oh, this is the smudge reminded me of what was on the other side of the card. It cued me, not the word, the smudge. And I thought, wait. So I remembered it. I went, wait a second. There's not gonna be a smudge on the test. What am I doing here? This isn't gonna work. What's going on? I kind of backed up, and it, to use your language, it threw me back on myself. And I said, what am I doing and why am I doing this? And I'm like, well, I kind of went through this process, and I'm trying to learn everything, get them all right. I need to know every word and what they mean. And I thought, actually, at the university, that's less the case than ever, because you're graded on a curve. And people were getting 40s on their chemistry test out of 100. That was the mean. Like, there was never a time in my education where I needed to know everything less, actually. Plus, and then I'm like, this is super boring. I really do not like this. And I just realized, look, if I can understand this stuff, I'll get 90% or something. I don't have to get 100. And I'm number one, I'm okay with that. I don't need to get 100. But also, too, like, that no one expects that. No one even wants that. But it totally transformed the way that I went about learning and studying. I really focused on understanding things. Maybe I'd already learned this maxim in psychology that understanding takes care of most of remembering. Like, you only have to memorize a little bit. So things that don't stick very well. But if you understand, that takes care of most of it. But I think this was a pivotal moment of, like you said, being like, you need some reason, like fundamental, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? That I hadn't asked. Everybody's doing flashcards. I'll do flashcards. Obviously, flashcards are smart. You should do that. That's a method. I didn't examine that until I got bored. And it was this kind of absurd example that made me face it.
Would you say, I was kind of thinking about it, like, there's the smoldering discontent. Like, you did the flashcards, and for a while, like, you're just doing them, like, okay, because this is what I need to do, but the whole time you're like there's this, like, increasing sense of this is just not right, and then it hits this point where you're just like, what am I doing? Like, is that right? Or is it?
I suspect that, as I remember it now, literally 40 years later, more than 40 years later, it was more boom. It was not incremental. I think I was enthusiastic about making the cards. It was something to do, and that's my general feeling. Like, okay, here's this thing I need to do, and I'm doing it, and I never did in high school. I'm doing more. I'm being a better student. That's my most predominant memory. But I do also remember, like, feeling like this is boring.
Right.
And so there was some dissatisfaction with that. And, like, this is why I went to college, just look at a bunch of flashcards. Like, I think there was some of that dissatisfaction. But go ahead.
I think, like, there's this discontent, and you not repress it, but you just ignore it.
Yeah.
Because you're like, well, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's what a lot of students have done. And they'll continue to do once or another in college. So they're just like, well, this stinks. It's, I got to just do it. And no matter what, there's going to be a bit of a grind. You can't eliminate that all entirely. But there's a sense in which you finally woke up to yourself, because there was part of you, like, not liking it the whole time. And then, like you said, you have this moment, it's like, bang, that you just, your attention can't ignore that discontent any longer. It's like, what am I doing? And what's cool about those moments is that you're in a position to say, I can't continue doing what I did before. The realization itself just deflates any motivation to continue doing that, which is great. And then, but you have to in that moment say, well, what am I going to do differently? Or, like, you have to put on your problem solving hat and detective hat and start, well, who am I? How do I learn? Some people, like the flashcards, they're visual learners. That's great. Perhaps I'm different. I don't know, like, right? Like, you just want students to really start exploring in those moments, perhaps with guidance from your audience, your office, and elsewhere, on what are the other available tools for studying in those moments. I don't know, I'm just kind of rambling here.
Yeah, I think there's a piece there. There's a moment in the transition that I think I glommed onto. I'm not sure was your main point, which is some dissatisfaction, or in a variety of ways. In my case, it wasn't that I wasn't doing well; it's that I just didn't like what I was doing. And I think for better or worse, I've often been motivated by, like, if I don't like doing it, I have a hard time doing it. I think many students at Princeton and Berkeley, they're remarkable at delayed gratification. They're remarkable at doing things to do them. And I'm like, I have not, as far as I can remember, except maybe in sports, that just did not motivate me. I had to have some kind of intrinsic motivation, that the experience. And I do, any case. So I think, but I think for me, again, for better or worse, that was a clear, much more powerful motivation. I didn't have a, like, oh, I'm just going to power through and do this thing. That's not, I've never been that way. I've never been that way. That's not my motivational makeup. My motivational pattern is find the thing that's engaging, figure out what you like about it, or find another thing that you like, and not settle for things you don't find interesting, enjoyable, engaging. And again, that's how other sides. But I think one thing I wanted to underscore here for many students is the awareness or the realization that I don't like this, or it's even more powerful, it's not working. And as you said, the key moment of putting on your problem solving hat and then shifting toward a solution orientation, right, and figuring things out, that often requires taking a risk, trying something out, going to somebody else to get some input, to learn from others' mistakes or errors and not only your own. I was saying lately that if you learn from your own mistakes, that's a sign of intelligence. If you learn from other people's mistakes without making, that's a sign of brilliance.
Yeah.
Like, are you willing to say, hey, this isn't working, and not wait till you get a terrible grade or burn out or whatever, but actually be sensitized to that difficulty and then do something about it? I think I am very sympathetic to students like, I know this isn't working, but I don't know what to do. And what do I do when I don't know what to do? That, I understand how that's paralyzing.
Right. Well, I just want to go back just to make a connection, because we talked about roommate conflicts and whatnot, and that, these people who are conflict avoiders, they tend to have a blow up at some point. And I just want to make sure we know that that's, in a way, the discontent that you've always had. It doesn't materialize just in that moment when you have a blowout. It's been there stewing the whole time. And I think that ultimately it's easy for us to project the anger outside of ourselves and say, it's this other person's fault, they're just, like, because they'll come into my office and say, like, I've had it, I did this, this, and this, and this, I let them have this or that, and, they're just horrible to live with, and so on and so forth. So it's all these projections, and they might be valid, but they don't. It's hard to say, well, how was I complicit or enabled this type of behavior?
What's my part in this?
Exactly. And so that's, trying to bend the conversation around to that is difficult, because it's very hard to admit that to ourselves. That, and I just to be stark, is there's a certain amount of cowardice. And Kierkegaard has this, I remember this one section, I can't remember which book, he talks about cowardice. Like, that's one of the last things we want to admit about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was easy to, like, Kierkegaard really does a nice job on cowardice, and then it'd be like, well, what does that mean for me? And then it was, looking at a lot of the times in my life when I was a coward, especially as a father. That's where it really, to me, is egregious. But it's, you can beat yourself up when you say, yeah, I was really kind of a coward there. Or you can say, yeah, you can admit it and say, but I'm not gonna, if I beat myself up, that's just a way of not dealing with that.
Right.
It's like, it makes me feel good, but it doesn't lead to growth. or ways to say, well, how am I going to avoid being a coward the next time, or what will enable me to show courage the next time. So anyway, I just want to, as harsh as that is, I think just admitting that, yeah, as a coward, as a conflict avoider, because I was a conflict avoider big time growing up, and just saying, I don't want to live like that. So I think there's an admission, but as we always say, let's admit the lack of courage, but not beat yourself up because of it.
Yeah, so accept. I think admit already kind of.
Yeah, I would say accept. Like, accept's a good word. Yeah, accept's better. And then to just say, yeah, but but then to have this belief in yourself that you can move forward, you can start to work on yourself in a way to start showing more courage in certain situations. So I just wanted, I think that's a bit of the process.
Yeah.
Is becoming self-aware, coming to acknowledge moments, but then accept them, but then not just cater to feelings of shame and guilt in a way that prevent you from moving forward. Because I think it's, again, just to emphasize, I think it's easy to kind of beat yourself up and then allowing that to be kind of a penance.
Right.
And then you don't deal with the problem. You just say, I'm a bad person, oh, whatever. And then but you still don't have the strength or the willingness to say, well, I'm gonna work on how not to be with that. And I think that another part of that is to say, I'm probably gonna fail again. But this is the practice part. This is part of training, is saying but I'm gonna be more aware. I'm gonna kind of use myself as a experiment, a lab, where I'm going to work on myself, and there's going to be trials and errors and, successes, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps back, but just hanging in there.
I think, one thing I might pause on there is sometimes people think acceptance is a passive resignation of the state of affairs, that you've resigned. Oh, you're accepting that, meaning you're not motivated to change. And that's not my definition of acceptance in this case. Acceptance is what is, not a resignation of what will be. It's an acceptance of the situation. I'm at this point in my development in my life acting this way, or I possess or don't possess such capabilities. That's not to say that's inevitable. And so I think sometimes, because for a certain person, and I might have been in this position, that acceptance sounds like giving up. And I don't, that's not what I'm communicating. I don't think that's what you are either. So just to clarify, that acceptance is what is that how, and that's crucial to making an appraisal. Is this how I want it to be? But without, I think the beating up sometimes is something more like how it should be. And that can interrupt acceptance, right? It's not that we don't have moral or frameworks or ethical frameworks, but at some point in terms of analyzing the issue, it's useful to put that aside, not permanently necessarily, but to say that if I feel shame, for instance, that can actually cloud my thinking, and I can generate justifications because it's so painful. And so if I can hold that in abeyance a little bit. But I think, and then trying to bring this back to a so what or a practical, you actually used a metaphor that I frequently use, again, working with students coming in. I say, I say, you're going to enter this environment that's organized by academic disciplines. Disciplines are ways of seeing the world and methodologies and frameworks. They're not subject matters like in high school. They're actually ways of viewing the world. And I want to encourage you to adopt a couple different disciplinary perspectives as you enter the institution. One is to be an anthropologist, is to try to seek and understand this new culture and make it strange, and assume that what's an injunction in anthropology is make it strange. Anthropologists make mistakes when they assume too much of a continuity or similarity between their native or home culture and the one they're entering. We want to try to make everything strange, see it from the outside, an anthropologist from Mars, so to speak, if you've heard that phrase. But the second is to be a psychologist. And in this case, I don't mean a therapist, which was what most students are familiar with, but an experimental psychologist, someone who tries out things and then sees the results. And in this case, to be a psychologist of one's learning and studying and say, hey, let me try this, let me try that. So and try to put these together, right? So the observation culturally is things are different. There's different expectations on me. So I need to adapt. Again, this is in the learning and studying academic realm. And then that requires some systematic experimentation. Well, what do scientists do? They don't just try new things. They reflect, they analyze, they interpret. And I think that's what I heard you saying here is turning to what people do, or in this case, students do, as they enter these situations and encounter these experiences. I think there's a useful way to think of it as experimentation, exploration. And I'll make the last point here. What I like about that metaphor or way of thinking is an experiment's useful regardless of the outcome if it's well designed. So there aren't actually failed experiments.
Right. Good point.
An experiment that yields a result that you hadn't hoped for is very useful, and sometimes even more useful than one that you had hoped for that would have been, say, publishable, because it removes a potential explanation or a confound. And so if we can lower the stakes, like I need to adapt, and implicit in the adaptation is it's going to work and I'm going to be successful, right? And as you said, no, the first try, second try it's probably not, it's very likely not going to be ideal, perfect.
Right.
Yet it's a step toward improvement.
Yeah, and we were talking about experiment, like just to put a little bit more, make it a little more concrete. I think for myself, transitioning away from being a conflict avoider was to kind of experiment with myself, to kind of go to work and, training on who I want to be. But part of that was when I think after situations where I did my conflict avoidance thing, it was helpful for me to say, well, why did I do that? What were the steps, or what was my fears? What did I did this because I feared an outcome. And what was that outcome? And why do I fear that? And what's the worst thing that can happen if that outcome even happened?
Mm.
Those were really like, kind of very revealing to me that okay, I was really just concerned about how this person, how I thought they thought about me, perceived me. And is that really important? Is their opinion of me contingent on this one little incident? What does that say about me and this relationship I have, that I think that they're going to, totally diss me and disown me after this one? Things like that were helpful, because
Yeah.
I know you talk about this too, because those are ways to kind of reduce the anxiety going into the next one. But it was helpful initially to kind of analyze that after incidences. And sometimes, you can do it yourself, but often it's helpful if you have someone you can trust, who you can kind of bounce these things off of and talk with. I think some of the RCAs trusted me enough to kind of work through those type of issues with me, because they knew I wasn't going to be judgmental and I was just going to ask questions.
Yeah.
I'm not a trained psychologist, so but I had some wisdom to just hold my tongue and just allow them to process, and people figure it out, because you're aware of yourself even when you're not aware of yourself, because you're always dealing with yourself, if that makes sense, to sound very Kierkegaardian. Like, so your self-identity is, as we talk about, is constantly what you're working on, even when you're not aware of it. But when you do some introspection, even by yourself or with another person, you can figure things out.
Yeah.
And it's good to have guidance at some, there's definitely that situation, but I think for a lot of the times you can work on yourself, or with a friend or a mentor.
Well, one thing theme that's coming out for me is in our roles of supervising young people, students. And so one of the things about that is I found over the years, number one, I tell my staff, like, you're going to need to learn how to say no to people in authority, and you should practice on me. And I'm going to ask you to do things. And sometimes I'm going to ask you to do things because I think you're the best person for the position. Sometimes I ask you to do things because I think it's a source of growth for you and you could go in that direction. Sometimes I'm just going to ask you to do things and you're going to say yes, and then you're going to have to say no, and you blew it because you overcommitted or whatever. And that's okay. now I expect you to be conscientious in making decisions. I'm not the one that you always say no to. That can't be the solution, right? So you can say no to me, but you can't say no to anybody else because you're trying to protect that. But I think so that we're taking an intentional aim, or taking the aim of being intentional about, hey, you have to deal with this kind of conflict, or readjusting a relationship, saying no. And I think a lot of young people, especially at places like Princeton, and they've said yes a lot, too much. And then a second thing that I've really tried to communicate, this has come up more and more recently, so maybe it's me being greater awareness, but it's related to what you're saying, which is, it's not, the employee that I'm looking for is not someone who never makes a mistake or has a problem. I don't think those exist. What I'm looking for is someone who tackles that head on and grapples with it and say, yep, my responsibility. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I do differently. I'm going to try to make this not happen in the future. Take initiative. And then, in fact, I try to communicate to them is, in fact, that can give me a greater estimation of you than never making a mistake. Is, can you handle this with professionalism and responsibility, and as an adult, and take responsibility and move forward? Actually, I have a higher point of perspective of you. And in fact, your faculty do too. So I think one of the things we're doing in these relationships is we're actually making explicit contrary expectations and beliefs to the student in this case. Because you said, I had this idea about how they're going to interpret me based upon their beliefs and their expectations of what it is. So students think, oh, professor wants me to always be correct. Professor wants me to never not know. Well, actually, no, they don't expect that, particularly people who create knowledge for a living. What they expect is you to be aware when you don't know, and then ask some questions to resolve that. And if you do, and you ask a good question and resolve it, they're impressed. If you just hide and conceal that you don't know, and therefore demonstrate mediocre knowledge on the exam, that is not impressive. And they notice, right? So if you phone it in to me, you're supposed to do this thing and you don't really prepare, and you phone it in, and I'm like, oh, I noticed that. Okay, rather than you say, you know what, Nick, I can't really do a good job under these circumstances. I need to say no. I'm sorry about that. In the future, I'll make sure that doesn't happen. In fact, can you help me? Here's some ideas I have for how to prepare better. And that might include a quick check-in with you for 15 minutes a week in advance so that I'm on track. Then I'm like, wow, this person is awesome. Even though they blew it, right? But sensibly, they blew it. But so I think unpacking that, I don't know that how many students at 18, 19, 20 have had anybody explain that to them. Or it just hasn't sunk in, hasn't got through. And I don't think I was any different. I think I had the same set of beliefs. I was supposed to be perfect, be right all the time. I shouldn't raise problems. I shouldn't be difficult. I shouldn't have these things. That's what the goal was. But of course, that's not accepting the reality of an imperfect person in an imperfect world.
Yeah, and they, like going back to our point before, how few students have been taught that prior to coming to college, because it's not necessarily the formula for getting into college or the college of your choice. So it's a really tough switch, because and we talked about, we both know this, like students like, I made it into Princeton, everything's gonna be great. And then as soon as they get here, like, oh my gosh, there's already students who are lining up internships. I've got to get going on that. And oh my gosh, these students are so smart. I need to get good grades to get into this college. I got to get good grades to get that internship and that job, or that, into the grad school I want, and all that kind of stuff. So it's so easy just to continue on the same treadmill versus pausing and just saying, there's this really amazing opportunity to train and really work on myself.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we both know it's a tough sell, but it's really the way to have this rich experience in college and set yourself up for a really remarkable career afterwards.
Yeah. And I guess I would add, and it's not at odds with academic success. I think sometimes that's how it's framed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Inadvertently, that kind of work means you won't be doing well academically. And I think that's not the case for a variety of very tangible reasons. One is you're feeling growth. You're actually taking care of yourself. You're having more nurturing relationships. You have more energy, right? If you feel good about yourself, you have positive regard because you're growing. That carries over into the more practical parts of your education. Gives you confidence to try things out. All these things combine and converge. They are not at odds most of the time. I mean, there's going to be some tough choices, but I'm just going to end with an example of a student that I know who, about his sophomore year, maybe his early junior year, said, I'm here to develop my emotional tools and awareness. I'm here to build these human qualities that I want, and I feel like I hadn't gotten before, and that are and that's my overarching purpose in my education. Along the way, studied computer science and philosophy, but that was, and very explicitly came to that awareness. This is what I want out of my education. And, just the point I'm trying to make is, got a full scholarship for graduate school PhD program, right? These are not at odds. And I think that's a message I'd want to leave, that the human growth goes along with the intellectual growth.
Yeah, and at the very least, it makes for a richer academic experience in addition to a college experience, because yeah, your classes will be much more interesting. I don't want to prolong the conversation, but I know a lot of students struggled with distribution requirements because they just wanted to focus on their field of study, and so these distribution requirements often were just things to get through, versus becoming curious and just as we know, like, developing your critical thinking skills in this class may seem unrelated to your field of study, but it's actually a way to become that much better a thinker and critical thinker. Anyway. All right. So before we go, any last so what's or practical things we need to emphasize or re-emphasize or reiterate?
Well, I think the practical part for me is, so if you're an avoider, how do you avoid avoiding, right?
Right.
I think that's a real paradox. Let's not minimize that, but I think the pattern remains the same. Awareness, underlying motive, gaining awareness of I have this pattern, I'm doing this thing, noticing a dissatisfaction, examining in a non-judgmental way the underlying motivations, coming with some empathy in the case of, okay, what's my part, but it's not my part of this issue. How do I want to improve? How does longer term, bigger goal, larger aim or aspiration provide me with the energy to meet this challenge, to make change, which is hard, and then begin to work on doing it, recognizing that that's not a purely linear, necessarily always successful process, right? So you said that, you're likely to hit some roadblocks, and that other people have a role in helping you to do that, right? So a thoughtful mentor or supervisor, or I think these are commonalities to a lot of the interventions or solutions that we talk about in other places in Vogue Academy. Right. Am I leaving anything out there?
No, I think that's great. I thought of this little part of a speech I would give at the beginning of the year in orientation. We'd have everyone from our residential colleges, and I would get up there, and I'm supposed to talk about discipline issues and all this other kind of stuff. And I kind of, I figure, like, what, they'll figure that out. It's not a big deal. So what I would get up there and say to all the students, I said, there's only one person you go through life with that's always going to be with you. Who is that? And, and they're like figuring out, well, like parents, they're not going to be there, spouses, whatever. And then they finally figure out it's yourself. And this is that self-relationality. You're always with yourself. And so then I said, okay, the question becomes, do you like yourself? And I was like, don't tell me now, but often when students were meeting with me, the answer was no. The students did not like themselves. they were not, they weren't living up to some standard that they have. And so, and I think that dislike of themselves can become extremely acute during college, because you're evaluating yourself by your peers and by these grade standards and parental expectations you have for yourself. There's ways to really overload yourself. And part of me is like, it's easy just to stay in that mode where you're just going, like, trying to fulfill all the expectations you may have, that you for yourself, that are a product of upbringing and peers and everything else. And just being willing to somehow awaken to yourself, as we talked about, be it through some conflict avoidance situations or situations where you might tend to beat yourself up, and just in those moments saying, wait a minute, I'm with myself, I'm going to be with myself for a long time. How can I take, just believe in myself and want to work on myself in a way that, I'll jeopardize some perceptions I've had, but those have been, those have led to a lot of anxiety and perhaps even despair. So, will students awaken to themselves day 2 of the college experience? Probably not. I mean, you're just trying to fit in, and there's just so much, your synapses are just going nuts trying to take all this new information in. But you want it, hopefully sooner rather than later, students to kind of wake up and just say, I don't want to be in this treadmill where I'm expected to do X and expected to do Y in order to get this job, in order to get into this grad school and whatnot. There still might be aspirations, but how do I live in the present and really work on myself so that I can have a more enriched experience now? That makes, and so that's very theoretical, but I think the point is just to say, you are in a relationship with yourself, you are evaluating yourself, you are, you should be your own project. And so how can you work on yourself in a way that's not judgmental, it's not, you're not beating yourself up, and you can just believe in yourself. And that might take working or finding some mentor, be it a friend or academic or a faculty member, or in your place of worship, I don't know, that's going to just be kind of a rock and someone who you can trust and who believes in you. And then hopefully through that relationship, you come to believe more and more in yourself. So anyway, that's, I guess, hopefully that's a so what there.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think one thing small point I would add is, I think our angle is working on oneself to be purposeful and to achieve fulfillment and flourishing, not hyper success.
Right. So
it's not that you're foregoing or sacrificing attainment, but that's not the primary motivation. And I think there is that people can react to this idea of working on yourself or taking yourself as a project as, oh, you're wanting, that's through a lens of not being adequate or being inadequate and to be super productive in the world. That is the dominant discourse out there about self-work and self-worth and self-improvement. But you can have the same project with a very different aim, and then that feels very different, has a very different experience, and it's much more immediate. The work on yourself is for now, right, and the future.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, let's hope people watch this video and we'll transform college life or college transition.
Yeah, at least get something another perspective and some new tools.
Yeah. All right, Nick. Well, until next week, thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Take care.
Take care.